it all kind of started with not having much at home. The absence of wealth was like pain. That feeling of desperation was the ultimate genesis of that hunger. Always fending for myself, this spirit of independence. Started a business because I wanted money. How to get money? You work. Sold the business a year after that, couldn't get a job. Nobody in traditional finance would hire me. Insurance companies, banks, no matter where I went, couldn't get a job, and I had a degree. My neighbor rolled up in his Toyota RAV4 with like a little sign written thing, mortgage broker on there, and I went, what's a mortgage broker? Long story short, got interviewed, got started as a mortgage broker. If wealth begins in the mind, which I'm convinced it does, the first thing is to just really bust open those paradigms and those restrictions and caring what people think. If you need to change where you're heading, who else is gonna, like, who's telling you? No one's telling you.
So what was it that started you on your journey to create wealth?
Personally,
Yeah.
in one word, probably desperation, I guess you could say.
Okay.
So going like way back, because I think everything probably goes way back to when you were a kid, right? So growing up, didn't really have much. And I think that in that environment, you either get an unhealthy obsession with stuff, or you learn the correct view on things. And I think, I don't know, I wouldn't say I got it at an early age in terms of understanding what wealth was and what money was and all that sort of stuff. But I had the hunger for it because I recognized and understood the absence, what happens with the absence of wealth or the absence of resource, and the way that made me feel as a child was like pain. And so I guess with any type of pain, you want to naturally move away from it over time. And so I think that it all kind of started with not having much at home, or not having much from my perspective, like I guess from others' perspective, my parents.
It's relative, right?
Yeah, like I'm sure I was incredibly wealthy by third world standards, but from my perspective, it certainly didn't feel like there was enough resource. And that feeling of desperation was kind of like, I think, the ultimate genesis of that hunger. Because before you get filled up, you have to be hungry, right?
Yeah.
And so that hunger was something that was kind of like just manifested there and simmering away. And so when I got older, this kind of attitude of always fending for myself, this spirit of independence, maybe that's where the libertarian sort of leanings come in. So I was always looking for ways to take care of myself from this, probably this anxiety around not being cared for in that material way to the extent that was possibly required from my perspective.
Yeah.
So that was really the genesis of it all, was the hunger. And then, yeah, like university, before university, or actually during university, started a business because I wanted money. Yeah. And so how to get money? You work. Well, no one's going to hire me, and so I became a window cleaner, and then I became a water blaster, and then I became a pest control person. This is all in university. Sold the business a year after that, couldn't get a job. Nobody in traditional finance would hire me. Insurance companies, banks, no matter where I went, couldn't get a job, and I had a degree. It's fairly into it, I would have thought. Zero chance I was getting a job. It took me 6 months. And then my neighbor, who happened to be a mortgage advisor, rolled up in his Toyota RAV4 with like a little sign written thing, mortgage broker on there, and I went, what's a mortgage broker? Long story short, got interviewed by a friend through the family and got started as a mortgage broker. And then again, still very rough start. For the first year, I should have been on the benefit versus actually working, but kept at it. Got a lucky break. Well, I shouldn't say it was a lucky break. I was ready for the opportunity when it showed up.
Yeah.
And capitalized on it. And then, yeah, the rest is kind of history from there.
Wow. Okay. So what are you doing now then to create wealth for yourself?
Working hard.
Yes.
Trying to keep a lid on my spending, and I'm doing the best I can with what's left.
Okay. So
generally.
So what are you doing with that? What's left?
Yeah, so at the moment, debt reduction.
Yep.
So we have an investment property portfolio. And over the 15 to 17 years that we've been building it up, we maxed out maybe 7 years ago. So we bought as many properties as we could for 10 years. Have been on interest only for the majority of the time,
Yep.
up until maybe a few years back. And now we're not taking on any more debt. We're now aggressively getting rid of the debt. So I consider my debt repayment strategy a form of investment. And then because it's quite a conservative investment, I go more like a barbell approach where I'll do higher risk, investing on the other side. And that's where it'll be an individual share portfolio. I call it my boring core. So I have my core of index funds, pretty boring stuff.
Yep.
I don't even like talking about it. Embarrassingly boring. And then some individual shares in the US. And did I say crypto?
No, you didn't yet.
Not yet. Yeah. So with crypto, it's primarily Bitcoin, like 80-90% Bitcoin, and then a little bit of Ethereum, and then a very small amount of, we'll call them meme coins.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's pretty much it. And then I have my business as well, which you could consider a concentrated investment as well. Oh, I'm also a massive fan of precious metals. So very like barbellish in that, very speculative, high risk, you could say, from certain perspectives. Other perspectives quite safe as well. And on the other end, my debt repayment strategy, I view it as kind of like a bond investment, because every extra dollar I repay off my debt is increasing my cash flow instantly.
Yeah.
And I'm not taking any risk. I'm de-risking.
Okay. And so you're a financial advisor.
Yes.
So you work with a lot of people on trying to help them start on their journey towards, creating wealth. What are the habits that you see of people who take on your advice and action it? Is there like, if you think of them as a group as a whole, are there habits that they have that are similar?
That's a good question. I think about that a bit, because I often ask myself the question, how did they
Get there.
find me?
Yeah.
How do they, why are we having this conversation? And I think a lot of times it's because they've discovered me, say, on a podcast or something. But before that, why were they listening to that podcast? Why were they interested in investing or getting wealth? There must have been a trigger. And I kind of view it as, it's probably not too dissimilar to somebody who feels like maybe they're a little bit overweight, or they can't keep up with their kids when they're playing, and enough is enough moment happens.
Yeah.
They decide to turn a corner and they're going to get serious. And depending on where they're at in that journey, they will be engaging in certain activities. So they might start by reading a book.
Yeah.
Even before that, they'll start with talking to a friend and identifying who amongst their circle of friends actually is open to talking about money. Maybe they'll read a book, listen to a few audio books, then they'll get stuck into some podcasts. They might do a couple of free online courses. Maybe they have an encounter with a financial advisor on their mortgage or insurances, and then they start to form this view that there's this whole community of people that can help them and that want to help them, and some will take advantage of that and engage with me at that stage. They'll go, right, financial advisor near me.
Yeah.
And depending on how active my Google Ads campaign is, which isn't very active at the moment, they will reach out to me that way, or more often than not, they might listen to the podcast for a couple of years, and then they'll reach out, have a quick discovery call on the phone with me, and off we go. But yeah, in terms of what is the common trait, I think it just comes down to that. At some stage, they've had enough as well around just where things are going financially, and they begin a process, which is of course different for everyone, but they begin that process, and I'm just part of that process, I think.
Okay. And so, we've spoken about this before, but times are tough at the moment for a lot of people, right? So for a lot of people, income is limited. So if you were to give some tips and tricks, I suppose, on how to start, what would you suggest?
In terms of like how to start investing when income is limited?
Yeah.
It's hard, right? Because you have some finite things that you have to deal with there, and you have to start with the income.
Yep.
It's the top line on any set of financials. So you have to start with that revenue. Unfortunately, most people will start with the expenses. And yeah, there's some ability to manipulate that, but that is so finite. You can only reduce your expenses by so much. And then you're actually creating the poverty which you're trying to offset, because your life is actually crap.
Yeah.
So there's a limit as to how far you go there. What's unlimited is the number on top, right? Like that's how do we increase the income? Can you invest in education to drive up your income? Yeah, to a certain extent. Are there other ways that you can do it? I personally believe being a hard worker and being creative are probably the two biggest assets, and being open-minded. They probably come hand in hand, being creative and being open-minded, right? But if you have that combo going on, you'll figure out ways to make money. And I think today we have such an amazing environment, even though times are really tough because of the rising cost of everything. such an amazing environment where you can be a podcast host. This makes millions of money. Not quite. This isn't exactly a profitable, but that's, like there are things that you could do to drive up your revenue.
Yeah.
The more you focus, and I know this from my own life growing up, that when I wanted money, I would do jobs for my neighbors. I would do jobs for my parents. I would figure out ways to get money from my extended family by cutting their grass and just doing whatever.
Yeah.
So it is possible. You just have to work on that top thing first before you fixate on minimizing that expenses. And then whatever is left over, you then have a choice as to which way you want to go. And how you rack and stack that is really, I guess, the art, because depending on where you're at in a typical life cycle stage, you wouldn't really want to be focusing too much, for example, on repaying your mortgage aggressively when you've just bought your first home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what most people do.
Yeah. Well, that's, what the norm is, right? It's what your parents tell you to do, theoretically.
Exactly, yeah.
So how much of it is mindset then? Because what you've gone through and your mindset, you were very proactive, you were very driven, you had a goal in mind. There's people out there who aren't necessarily made the same way. Yeah. Is there anything that you could suggest around helping people move towards that if trying to grow wealth is a thing for them?
So I don't know much about the concept of the Overton window from a political perspective, but this whole idea that there's this window of acceptable viewpoints I find quite fascinating, and I think that to a certain degree most of us have a very, very narrow set of acceptable beliefs and opinions and viewpoints, and we're extremely frightened to go outside of that Overton window. So I think the first thing is to blow that bad boy wide open, which is really easy to say.
Yeah.
But for some reason, really hard to do. I've always felt like I've been on the outside of that window. So for me, it's just like, hey, come outside. It's nice outside once you get in.
Yeah.
But that's the first thing, is to just really bust open those paradigms and those restrictions and caring what people think, because
it's the red pill, blue pill moment, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to? I kind of always kind of think about it about kind of living by first principles, or living by analogy, and I feel like blue pilling is kind of hearing what the world, the world and the kind of consensus is, and then just repeating it and believing it. And then to me, the red pill is living by first principles, and what I mean by that is trying to work out fundamentally what is, like, what we know to be true. Like, I know this table is a table with 3 legs. Like, I know that. Like, I can know that. I know that, Apple is a manufacturer of phones and has services and builds, accessories for its primary devices. Like, I feel like opening that window is just trying to be curious and find out truths or find out understanding. And I guess, like, the more understanding you can have, and I think we may have had a brief conversation on the podcast with you when it was like, when I was kind of talking about eating with other people, and it's like, yeah, the window is, hey, life experience, perspectives may both be different, but actually both have valid points.
I kind of, there's that, the 5 people you hang with the most is who you start turning into. So would you say that who make up your social network can help or hinder your wealth growth?
I'm positive, right? Because if wealth begins in the mind, which I'm convinced it does, then who you hang out with, if you're the type that likes to mimic those, which unfortunately most of us are, then you're going to become who you hang out with. I'm introverted. I don't really hang out with my friends enough. I should. But the side effect of that is that I'm not really influenced by them either. And that's probably why I enjoy hanging out with them when I do, because they're different. I think if you're not the one that is constantly feeling like people think you're a bit strange, then you're probably not outside that window, though. Yeah. And my biggest concern is that you're sleepwalking into probably one of the biggest risks of your life, heading into a period of time which is the biggest, most transformational time that we've ever seen with technology, and you're busy worrying about what other people think. I think it's insane. And I think that, I don't know the book super well. I think I read it 30 years ago. I did a book report on Catcher in the Rye. Mm-hmm. You know that book?
I haven't read it. No, I've heard of it, but
yeah,
I haven't read it.
Classic book, right? Awesome. Anyway, they're effectively the protagonist, the main character. Holden Caulfield, had a dream. He was standing in a rye field and he was trying to stop the children who were running and about to go over a cliff. So he felt like his role was to protect the children, right? And so for me, like when I'm thinking about wealth and when I'm in my role as a financial advisor, I feel like I'm kind of doing that. I'm trying to protect people to a certain extent. Protect it, it's a bit patronizing, right? I'm trying to warn people that there's a cliff, that there is change which is changing, transformational change, and that there are certain things that you can do to either be a beneficiary of that change or be a victim of it, which is the default, by the way. But if you need to change where you're heading, who else is gonna, like, who's telling you? No one's telling you. Everyone, more or less, is on their own journey trying to maximize their own benefit. So there's zero incentive for them to help other people. And so for me, one of the things that's outside of my Overton window is to try to help people build wealth when there's no financial incentive for me. And in some cases, a financial disincentive, a lot of times actually. A lot of conversations I have will be with people that I don't agree with, but they have very strong views which will turn off a lot of people listening. They can't handle that point of view, or they'll be a competitor to me and they'll get some business out of it. I won't. But that's kind of like, if I do something that's so different, then I'm probably more likely to see the benefit of that action than the person who's always trying to optimize for their own self-interest. I forgot the question that you asked originally.
No, where we're going is great. I was going to ask, so if you've got, a couple in front of you and they are on the inside of the window, how do you move them, or how do you enable them to open their eyes?
Yeah.
Like, that can't be an easy thing.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. It's about trying to find out where it is really quickly. So I follow a framework which starts with purpose. So if you can imagine a triangle, we have purpose, goals underneath that, strategy, which is their financial strategy or their wealth building strategy, tactics, tools that they're using to invest with, and then there are actions underneath. So what are the day-to-day things that you have to do to power your tactics, which are all connected to your purpose. And to unpack that a little bit is really trying to get people outside that window, right? And the one area which is where I always butt up against this wall, I'm still trying to get better to bust through this wall with people, is what is your purpose? Like, why are you here on earth? What is the purpose? Like, if you were all sorted, because you're here talking to me about how to get what you want. So if you had what you wanted, what would you do with your time? If your kids were sorted, your retirement was sorted, what do you believe in? What would you stand for? What would you even give your life for if you did? Something that you truly feel passionate about. It's really hard for people to answer that question. It's really hard because it's material is always the number one thing. It always comes back to, I want more stuff, or I want to have time so I can travel. Okay, so once you've done all that, then what? Like, what would you be into, right? And so that, I find, is a door that you can sometimes walk through with people to discover that, wow, okay, so you're actually, this is really interesting for you. Your partner doesn't even know that that's what actually motivates you, but and then that can often be a little bit of a moment that can help people to move through. And it doesn't need to be anything that dramatic, but it just means that now all of their actions on a day-to-day level is now connected to a framework which gives them meaning, right? Because they're actually doing something according to their purpose. The other ways that you can do it is really just the interesting thing is that when people are really similar, they resonate, or they're in sync with each other so much that they never get advice. So I seldom will catch up with people that have the exact same viewpoint, because they'll always just talk themselves into whatever they were already doing. If they had a bad experience with something, the other person will say exactly the same thing and parrot that, and they never actually will challenge each other or go outside of that. And so I never see those people anyway, very rarely. But so I'm always seeing some people that are quite different, and so it's just a matter of understanding that perspective and allowing the heavy lifting to occur from them rather than me.
Yeah.
Because it usually is obvious. You don't have to force something which is true. You just have to reveal it, and that usually comes out in those meetings. Yeah.
There's been a really big movement, at least within my small world and what I've seen, around women getting better educated around finance and investing and that kind of thing. Maybe not so much my generation, maybe the generations coming through. Have you noticed a difference in the people that you're seeing because of that? Or are you starting to?
That's a good question. Yeah. There's definitely, like, there's a lot of interesting trends of different people types that I see. But yeah, if I think about the people that reach out to me, more often than not, if it's a couple and it's a him and a her, usually it's the her that reaches out.
Yeah.
And I think it's partly because women probably have a much easier time trying to visualize that which they're trying to build, whereas men, more often than not, and forgive me men for being sexist, will focus on the tools.
Okay.
Will focus on the machinery, the actual investment itself, whereas women will generally, and I am generalizing massively, they will look at, cool, we're trying to construct this and achieve this outcome, which is a really important thing. You need to have both, of course,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
that's why it's good to have that dynamic going on where, you know,
Okay.
it's happening. But that's one of the things I have seen is more people coming through that they have a baseline education, which they've often achieved through, say, podcasts or books, and they've done these things because it's been, say, a women's group or a women's podcast or a course which they've done, which has they wouldn't have done it any other way because it was always maybe too threatening, or it wasn't
Yeah, it's a safe space, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now that they've gone through that, the confidence is there, because it should have always been there, because quite often women make better investment decisions than men because of what I just said before. Yeah. But I guess I would never have appreciated it until I've seen it, that once you go through that, yeah, they just need that confidence and the network, and they know which levers they need to pull now, and then off they go.
Okay. From a, I suppose, more personal point of view, like throughout your kind of journey around creating wealth, things don't always go as you plan, right? Often we focus on the thing at hand and maybe let other parts of our life slip, or, people starting up businesses. We just spoke to a gentleman earlier, 80 hours a week on a business. There's no way you can hold all the other spinning plates in the air kind of thing. Have you ever gone through anything like that yourself personally?
Where I am overextending in one area at the expense of others?
Yes.
I don't want to say no, but I am struggling to kind of think of a specific situation where I was out of balance in one area at the expense of others. All I could say probably is the opposite, where my approach to most things is so diversified and generalist that I seldom succeed in any one area because I'm so diversified or balanced.
Or hedged.
What's that?
Or hedged.
Hedged. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because hedging just takes the edge off everything, right?
Well, hedging, there's an expense to hedging, right? I was talking to someone the other day about quite a big thing in New Zealand or investments. When you think about investments in New Zealand, is hedging, New Zealand dollar hedging, right? And it's actually such a big kind of focal point. Oh, it's NZ dollar hedged. Well, when you hedge, you're paying for that hedge. You're buying insurance.
Yeah.
And guess what? That costs you. And like you say, it's really interesting, I guess, like, having a broad set of views can be really helpful, but like you say, like, if you over hedge or over diversify, you kind of, you actually may be not benefiting as much as the books tell you. Like, we always hear about diversification in investing, and I think it's overdone, this whole kind of notion of diversification, because actually, if you look at the majority of assets these days anyway, you look at the correlation, it's pretty similar. And it's because it's often tied to the value of money, or the cost of money. So I like Druckenmiller and Munger's approach of being more focused on a select group of high conviction investments that have diversification, but you're not kind of getting, I guess, too watered down.
Yeah, totally. It's like a plate, your dinner plate, right? You have your meat and 3 veg, but they have to be very well, for me anyway, they have to be very distinct. I don't like blending it all together, but you would never just chuck that all in a blender and drink it, right? But that's kind of like how we invest. It's not very engaging and fun, right? But
yeah, and I think it's because we were talking about this earlier, it kind of gives people the sense of safety. Oh, well, I'm diversified, therefore it's going to be okay. It's in investing, it's often, and I don't want to, it's hard to say it because actually it can be misconstrued, but like, the fear of, basically it's fear and greed, right? So the fear of losing is often what gets you in trouble. And that could be the case in terms of being potentially over diversified, not necessarily because diversification is wrong, but because you may end up having so many little investments here, there, and everywhere that how do you manage that? It's an operational nightmare. And I think that goes hand in hand with life in general as well. I think about it with jiu-jitsu. Like, I focus with my training in a very specific way. So there in jiu-jitsu, there's gi and no gi. So gi is with a kimono, no gi is without. So it's more like wrestling. And I've trained both. But I recognize that I'm not going to be the best at both. So in my training style, I've adopted that even though I use the gi and I train in the gi because you kind of have to, I don't use any of the advantages the gi give me because I'm more interested in getting really good at no gi. And I think that focusing, I think broad is great, but I think also having some focus, and if that aligns with your purpose and passion, which I think is a lot of what you're trying to help uncover for your clients, is super beneficial because that's where you're going to be interested in going deep anyway, right? And spending your time. It's kind of like what you've done with your podcast and your interest in finding out what your limit is in terms of your broad view. So that's why you're pushing the boundaries with your podcast, even though, you know, you may say, oh, well, some of the guests aren't as mainstream, so that might have a immediate or short-term impact on revenue in some ways or ability to monetize. However, you're gaining insights that you may never have gained if you didn't have the, I guess, courage to find out what their views were.
It's connected. It's kind of connected, isn't it? Like the whole piece. Like even the concept of diversification as you're building a business, right? You need.
Oh, I think about it all the time in startup.
Yeah,
totally. There have been so many times where I'd say the mistakes that I've made have been around trying to hedge out multiple initiatives because I'm worried that the one I'm most bullish on or the one that I kind of think is going to work the most won't. And if it doesn't work, well, I need a plan B. I need a plan C. Yeah. And actually that's distracting, taking resource. We all have finite resource, whether that's capital, computation, time, mental bandwidth, neurons. Like, yeah, I think, hedging is always what we talk about being safe. But hedging and diversifying yourself and getting a plan B, an escape route, is often comes at a cost too.
Yeah, and so it's like, look, I was thinking about this must have been a few weeks ago with my kids. I think if you're in business, if you're slightly ambitious, then at some stage your kids will probably suffer. That's reality.
Yep.
And it's unfortunate because there's a whole lot of problems with that. And so I've always been aware of that. And so when business for me started to really take off, I was conscious of that. And so I wanted to offset that. Now, I could have gone so much further in business, but I didn't. What I have been able to do is I have been able to be at home most nights at dinner time, right? I'm at home for dinner, and I'm usually there while they go to school. And so that's important. I'm usually with them on the weekend, and I'm usually able to control my day so that if something's going on, I can be there for them. So they'll never appreciate that. I'm not expecting them to, but for me, that's important, right? So there's other areas of my life which have attention because I've adopted that elsewhere. So when you think about this diversification thing, that's more like balance, I guess, rather than diversification. But the cool thing with diversification is that there's this concept that I read about in a book called The Pumpkin Plan. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book. Michael Michalowicz, I think is his name. And the whole idea is that if you want to grow a really, really massive pumpkin, just plant a bunch of pumpkins and then just get rid of all the plants that don't produce the good pumpkins and nurture the ones that do. And so when you're diversified in your thoughts or in your investments, at a stage you will discover which ones are working, right? Yeah. And that's where there is probably a season, and even for me professionally, I'm going through this season right now of concentration, because now I understand which ones are the successful or the fruitful or the big pumpkins, and I'm not really interested anymore in dealing with these rubbish sized pumpkins. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's kind of like tolerating these kind of less fruitful things because I need at least 6.
Yeah.
I need 6 pumpkins, so I will endure these 3 kind of funny looking ones, I guess, because I need at least 6, even though they may be taking resource. And I guess if you focus, you may have better results.
Yeah, you don't want to take that through to children, right?
Yeah.
There's a limit to how far we take this metaphor.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like you've mentioned, you've got kids. So how have you taught, or how are you teaching your kids around, or educating them around finance and investment and wealth in general? Because wealth's not just money.
Yeah.
How are you approaching that?
Yeah. So I try to be consistent, like with what I personally believe, what I talk about in the podcast, what I talk about with my clients, and then what I talk about with my kids.
Yeah.
And I think, I'd like to think anyway, and I'm pretty sure I'm fairly consistent in that there's nothing that I believe about money and resource and wealth that I don't believe with high conviction myself, to the point where there's not something that I would talk about in the podcast that I wouldn't talk in front of my kids about. And that includes the way I talk.
Yep.
So I don't, there's nothing different there. And personally, I believe that wealth isn't it's not a thing. It's more of like a river. It's a moving thing. And the more you receive, the more you give. And as you do that, your life becomes bigger. And that's kind of what I'm trying to teach my kids. And so giving is really important. Generosity, super important. Having a plan for the money that you have, like being a good steward of what that resource is.
Yeah.
Working really hard so that you actually understand and appreciate, feel the weight of what money is, which is an opportunity cost. You either sacrifice freedom, or you've sacrificed your own human time and energy to put it into a job so you can get some money so that you can do something fun. Cool. They should feel that. So we went away last year on a family trip. Awesome time away. But our kids, they worked their butts off. Like, we were selling wood, firewood. They were doing chores. They were doing work for their extended family for money. They were saving all of their allowance, which they only get if they do jobs around the home. So like they earned it. And that's kind of what I want them to feel, is the weight of money, like the real weight of it, not money as in a resource that we get, but as in something that we really earn, because I think that's kind of lost. And so that is absolutely consistent with what I would believe with my clients, in that, cool, let's talk about the infinite, let's talk about the income piece and what your plan is there, and let's talk about your budget to the extent that you feel comfortable right now, because it is kind of a sensitive thing and it's a boring thing for a lot of people. You want to tread carefully. And yeah, let's talk about how you're investing and where you're investing and what you're investing in, but let's do it in a way which recognizes that freely you've received, now freely give. This isn't about you accumulating and just creating a big, dark green septic pond of money. This is about flow. This is about, like, what are you doing with that money? Are you just trying to build up huge portfolio of rental properties so that you die rich and then family argues over the leftovers?
Well, so what are your thoughts on intergenerational wealth then?
I have a lot of thoughts on it.
Would you like to share?
So there's the vessel and there's what you fill it with.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, when they're investing and they're growing up and going through life, they're thinking about intergenerational wealth as in an inheritance. They're going to give some money to their kids one day. And that's part of it, sure. But what they're not doing is they're not teaching the kids how to work and respect money and their respect time, including the time of others, so that when it's time to receive that money, it's gone. And I can't remember the numbers, like 97% of all wealth is gone in the third generation anyway. So if you're not actually working on preparing the vessel to receive that which you're trying to build up, then good luck. Yeah. It's just a waste of freaking time. Do something else. So yeah, I think it is so important, but we're so scared to teach our kids how to work. We're too busy trying to be their friend, and we don't discipline them like we should. You're nodding your head, so you obviously agree.
I agree.
That's good.
Yeah.
But these are all messages that are just not at all popular, unfortunately. And so it doesn't get through. And I think probably well over 2 generations now in New Zealand, we haven't been educating our kids about money, about work, about sacrifice, about doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Yeah. And we're seeing that bear fruit now. And
you can see that in the numbers, I don't know if you saw it, but I was watching this progressive chart of personal wealth or wealth per capita, and New Zealand was at the top. It was like second or third in the 60s.
I saw that, yeah.
And now we're nowhere to be found. And it kind of talks to that kind of multi-generational approach, perhaps, where, maybe there's been a misallocation of resource, but also maybe headspace.
You're right. I always, like, the easiest thing to blame everything on when you're trying to figure out how the world works is just blame it on the money. That's my favorite one. It's not. It's too simplistic, I know, but I think as the money holds less value over time, we have to work harder, and therefore we have to optimize for going to the job more than going to the family, and as a result, our value set shifts. Kids grow up without that influence that they need, and next thing you know, they're chewing with their mouth open. You know, that's obviously it's quite shallow to bring it back to table manners, but that's a symptom of multi generations not teaching their kids any manners, and you could extend that and apply it out in every area of life because we have to work harder and harder and harder for our money.
Right.
In my view.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, with the devaluing kind of, it's like a video game. You know, like the modern economy is like a video game. You know, you think about first iterations of games. You know, the numbers always get bigger, right? And a new game comes out, the number of damage or the number of health or whatever you want to, you know, it always increases, you know, and it's like, it's the same in the real world economy as we've now got far more leverage, the ability to create leverage, and, you know, time's gone on, the inherent value of money obviously decreases over time, and then, you know, eventually the way we operate or the way we transact, because money is just an IOU, and it's just that we predominantly choose the US dollar right now as our IOU. That may eventually change, and then it will, you know, the regime of 1,000 of whatever we're willing to exchange may then become 10.
So that's interesting though, because your background is in like gaming, right? So yeah, you get this. So like chess, right? You have one life, you're gone, or checkers, right?
Yeah.
But then, yeah, like my first memory of video games was like, well, now you have 3 lives, and now it's like you have health, which is like it's just analog, right? And it just slowly goes down to 0. So is that kind of what you mean? That there's this gradual shift where it's not just...
Well, I think that, you know, as systems grow, the currency, which may be health or damage or gold, I mean the currency of the game, there's just natural deflation that happens as things get bigger and things progress. And it typically happens in games. It happened in the gaming platform that I built. We had a currency that we created. And that currency, you know, the number of currency in the system kept inflating. And we would do things to reduce the currency, to try and manage that problem that we had. Because we had this problem where, you know, people would complete quests and they would earn our currency. So then we needed to, we actually had it as a balance sheet item on our business, because 1,000 of the currency on average cost us $1, right? So when it was getting too big, we would do initiatives to make people spend the currency, so that basically our liability would go down.
Fascinating.
It was.
How similar is that to where we're at today, though, right? Where tax is basically taking some of that currency out of the system.
Yeah.
Control, we have to finite amount of resources, we have to allocate it somehow within the economy, therefore we'll eventually control how much people can
tax,
buy.
interest rates, forced investing, of course, that's kind of somewhat capital capture, even insurance, of course, right? Because those premiums go somewhere and it feeds the financial system, and as those premiums rise, then obviously that's more capital. That means that we have to work harder to get capital. And, you know, at the end of the day, I always say that, and I've borrowed it or stolen it from Munger and Carl Icahn, that, you know, cash is happiness and it's oxygen. And you want to, you know, and as a business or an individual, you need oxygen to live, because oxygen gives you time. And what we're all really working out what we're doing is, how the hell do we spend our time?
Yeah.
In an acceptable way, where we feel like it's an okay way to spend our time. You know, if you spend your time sick, it's not a very nice way to spend your time. But if you spend it fulfilled and doing something you want to do, then it doesn't matter. Time almost doesn't matter, although it's passing for everyone, right?
Yeah, fascinating.
So if someone comes to you and they're like, right, I'm starting my wealth creation journey, what are the things I need to do to start with?
Yeah.
What advice would you give?
So get your personal finance sorted first, would be what I would do. And I wouldn't have always said that. I was kind of probably in the past been fairly dismissive of kind of doing that, just because from my own personal experience, I've always found it easier to make more money than to control my own spending. But yeah, there comes a time where you have to grow up on these things, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of went through a phase a while back where it was like, all right, I have to actually think about where the money is going, because it's coming in and out too fast, and I'm not in control anymore. It's just leaking. And so out of that came I built a personal finance course, which is an online personal finance course that I use with my clients now, so that before I meet with them, they will ideally do this course, which goes through the basics of everything, like how to diversify your income, how to max out your income, how to keep a lid on your expenses, and then how to invest the rest the best that you can. So it's kind of like just the basic building blocks.
Yeah.
And anything, read a few books, kind of go through the hard yards, do a budget. Sorted.org, I think, is the best one that I've discovered, just to do a budget. And once you've sorted that out, you can have confidence because you're going to have visibility over where your money already goes, which makes it more likely that you're going to control it. Because if you want to invest, that's great. But if you don't actually have any money to invest with, it's kind of a waste of time wanting to do it, right? You actually have to do it. So I think that's where I put people first, right? Is get your personal finance. And then the next thing would be just to think about where they're at in their life cycle stage and thinking about their home as a type of investment, which it kind of is. And it's not necessarily good or bad that property values double in value roughly every 7 to 10 years. It is just what it is. And that kind of goes back to what we're saying about the currency before. That's kind of what happens in the game. And so we need to kind of think about our property as our first step, I think. So getting into your first home as soon as you possibly can, regardless of what you think you're going to need to use that property for. Like in your 20s, there's no way you're going to be thinking about settling down with a family maybe, but you might be traveling. Get a property first. Don't faff around and make the biggest mistake in your life by spending all your savings on an overseas experience until you bought your home. Ideally, not very popular advice.
Yeah, I can imagine. But with that kind of thing, it's again, it's time in the market, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if I could go back, I would have, like you say, I would have bought the property before we travelled.
Totally. Yeah, same here. If you could, right? If you could.
Yeah.
But I think life is full of these choices where you optimize between the financial objectives and your lifestyle objectives. And then some people will be really clever and lie to themselves and wrap up their lifestyle objectives in a financial veneer just to get it past their partner or their friends. But really, you're doing a trade-off, right? So yeah, get a handle on your personal finances. Buy your first home as soon as you can. Get your KiwiSaver settings correct, or your retirement investment account up to about 10% of your overall income as fast as you can. Obviously, there's got to be some flex here. This isn't like you do this or else you don't do it properly. This is just ideally, this is what you would do, because if you're saving 10% of your income, you're doing good.
Yeah.
You're doing really good. And that whole concept of 10% of your income, that actually comes from a book, The Richest Man in Babylon, which is a fantastic book on personal finance, I think, or just general common sense. Not a big read, but it talks about, hey, as long as you're investing 10% of whatever you make, then you're really equipping the future you to be successful as well. So yeah, personal finance, property, KiwiSaver at 10%, and then start
Would
thinking.
you say KiwiSaver at 10% or self-directed for the other? Because it's there's 4 residual there. Because obviously I was talking a little bit earlier about kind of capital capture. So would you say you go into KiwiSaver and pay the fees, or it's just more of a discretionary choice?
Up to you.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, like I'll say KiwiSaver at 10% just to keep it simple. But yeah, like really underneath that would be KiwiSaver at a minimum, invest somewhere else, subject to who you are as an investor, because
what's right for you.
Yeah, like for me personally, I love KiwiSaver, even though I'm self-employed and I don't have an employer contributing towards KiwiSaver. I'm still using it because it's a great ring-fenced.
Oh, because you can't get it out.
Yeah, until age 65, right? So I'm thinking, awesome, if I become a Muppet, or I am already a Muppet, I'm not sure, and I'd make a really dumb decision with my resource, then at least this is protected from myself. I can't take this money out. Yeah, I could move it around these days. There's a lot more options where you could get into trouble with KiwiSaver, but that's kind of why I like it. But after you've got that, we'll call it your core portfolio there with diversified managed funds, whether it's KiwiSaver or some other managed fund, ETF index fund, then satellites, work on your satellites. Now, I also would say, big exception to the rule here with satellites or smaller concentrated buckets of investments, they generally need longer time to cook, right? So Bitcoin, a lot of people look at Bitcoin, for example, as a speculative bet, and they kind of play around with it without realizing what it really is. And I believe that the best thing that you can do is to hold some Bitcoin right away and hang on to it forever. Like that is the core of your intergenerational wealth, perhaps, that you might give to your kids. So the faster you get a hold of these higher risk assets, the better, because then you're allowing for a longer time for it to mature and do well. So, I'm not saying that you would build a massive portfolio with KiwiSaver, but just get your income allocations set correctly as fast as you can, so that when you get an increase to your income, it's really easy to figure out where to put it.
Yeah.
Because too many people will kind of just max out everything on living large until they're 35, and then get some money from mom and dad to put towards a home, and then think about KiwiSaver in their 50s, and then in their 60s, hey, should I be investing in individual shares, right? They do everything backwards. And I understand why that happens, but I think whatever you feel like doing, chances are the opposite is probably the better idea when it comes to that.
Okay.
I always thought about a feature on the site. We haven't done it, but I've thought about it often. Should we make a feature like where we lock, like where you have the choice to lock yourself out?
Ooh, that's good.
You know
like
what I mean?
Time lock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I often think about that because it was when I was talking to my good friend Carl, who built a amazing company called Letterboxd, and we were walking along Queen Street, and I was like, imagine if we were just we were a broker that just locked you out of actually transacting. What if we did that? That's opposite of obviously the incentive of the platform that wants you to transact.
Yeah.
But it's also, like you say, sometimes things need time to cook, and sometimes you need protection from yourself. And like you say, the main benefit for KiwiSaver is, you can't touch it, no matter how much you want to.
HODL mode. So there's a platform which I don't even want to mention it, which now doesn't exist, but it had something called HODL mode, and you could put your assets into this platform and earn interest on it.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So that never ends well when it's crypto assets anyway.
Yeah.
And so but the cool feature about it was to stop you from taking it out and trading it and being speculative, or even as a safety feature, you turn on HODL mode and it would have a certain delay. I can't remember what it was. And then you had to send an email, and then it had to get processed. And so that whole creating
barriers for yourself.
What's that?
Barriers and accountability for yourself.
Yeah, accountability, like hurdles, increasing the friction. We are the biggest risk, right?
Yeah.
We always think about everybody else's hands getting a hold of our resource, but really it's our own hands. We're the ones that are the Muppets often. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been really interesting.
Great chat.
Excellent.
Really appreciate you coming on.
Cheers.
Thank you.